Hey everybody, it's KennedyHawk here from the Space Arena Ground Arena podcast. Today we are going to go over a deck tech for one of my favorite leaders in the Twilight Republican set, Anakin Skywalker with Vigilance. I have with me co-host Banana. How's it going, sir?
I'm doing good. Um, I like this little dual format for the deck tech video. So
Yeah, it gives us a chance to talk a little bit more. I'm so bad at presenting when it's just me, so hopefully you can poke holes in my deck just like I did for yours. Although hopefully my holes weren't too big because I played your deck and it was super fun.
glad to hear that. Yeah, I did. And actually, I think it's Spider Mana or Astrodar. I forget which one. And Marvel Champions made a suggestion to me, and I was like, "Yeah, you're right. Probably should have done that." So I did make that change, and I did add those dudes that healed my base for 3. So
Nice.
it's been running good. So thanks for that.
All right. Well, today's deck tech is going to be all about Anakin Skywalker with the vigilance aspect. And I have a little story about how this deck came about. I'm traveling for work. My horrible amount of work travel ends tomorrow. I'm officially flying home, but I brought with me a double blue Ray deck. So I
Mm.
bought a bunch of Twilight of the Republic cards at the local meta here, and I've got to play it with a bunch of different stores here in Florida, where I am right now. But the only old cards I've been able to add to a deck are Vigilance. So I opened Anakin in my first pre-release kit, and I thought he was super fun. I love Overwhelm. I love leaders that have a little bit of risk reward, but the only option I had to build with him for my entire kit was I brought a Ray deck and I brought 30 sideboard cards because I wasn't sure what I was going to sideboard in. And this is the deck I settled on, and it's super fun. So let's get into this Anakin deck that people might think is a meme deck, but I actually think works pretty well.
Let's see
All
it.
right. So, what we're going to go through, we're going to do sort of the agenda of what we're going to talk about, just like we did last week with Banana. So, we're going to be going through the hook of the deck. Why is this deck fun? Why should you try this deck out? We're going to go through the list, just read through the list card by card, and then talk about some of the features in the deck where I'll highlight certain cards within the deck and how they work out to be a key feature of this deck. We'll go through, I think it's 3 or 4 general strategy tips, talk about mulligans, sideboarding, and some cards that just got left on the cutting room floor. In case this deck isn't perfectly your style, you can give it your own flair. Finally, we'll wrap up, and through each of these categories, Banana will be able to question my sanity as I pair healing with dealing damage to myself. So, the deck hook, Anakin Skywalker the leader. If you haven't played him from the Twilight of the Republic set, he has an action to exhaust the undeployed side, the leader side, and deal 2 damage to your own base to attack with a unit. If it's attacking a unit, it gets +2 for this attack. This works really well with Overwhelm. It works really well for sort of swinging up and controlling the board, which is I think what a lot of people like to use it for. It's kind of a bit of risk reward because you damage yourself to buff up your unit for an attack. And the reward for that is you get this buffed up unit, but also when you deploy Anakin, he's a 6 cost 4/7 deployed character, and he has Overwhelm built in, and he gets +1 attack for every 5 damage on your base. So for putting damage on your base, you're going to buff Anakin's attack. So the reward for this self damage is having this tricked out leader. So here we're taking what I would think would be an unlikely aspect pairing. We deal damage to our base to take some risk, and now we're going to include a bunch of restore and crazy stuff from the vigilance aspect to try to sort of offset that. So, is it worth it? We'll find out. I had to make a meme because I'm a meme character. I've seen so many Anakin decks, and I'm super hyped to play him with my full collection in the aspects that I've seen a lot of people talking about. Anakin with command, Anakin with aggression, Anakin with cunning. But as a person that every deck, or every set I've tried to iterate around in different colors, away from blue, I always find myself coming back to blue. So this is going to be Anakin restoring 1 after he commits war crimes by, hitting your own base. So
Hmm.
here is our deck list, and we'll go through card by card, and then let you ask me a couple questions about it, Banana, if you could. So it's a pretty interesting list. So we've got 2 copies of Force Throw, because Anakin is a Force user himself, and we're going to include a lot of Jedi in our deck. We've got 2 copies of Top Target, just to give ourselves a little bit more healing. I'm going to go through and jump through the space units next. So we've got 3 copies of Restored Arc, 2 copies of the Padawan Starfighter, 3 copies of the Dawn Interceptors, 2 copies of Razor Dawn, and 2 copies of Redemption. So a ton of space units, a lot of little cheap ones, and then some Sentinels to kind of keep ourselves in the game. For ground units, we've got 3 copies of Kuil, 2 copies of the Kashyyyk Defender, 3 copies of Yoda, 2 copies of Captain Typho, 3 copies of Kanan, 2 of Kid Adimundi, 3 of Obi-Wan, 3 of Luke, and 2 of Chewbacca. And then we've got some events to top things off. So we've got 1 Rivals Fall, 2 copies of The Force is With Me, 3 copies of Hello There, one of my favorite new cards from the new set. And like I mentioned, the 2 copies of Force Throw to start off with. For upgrades, we've got Top Target, which I already mentioned, Entrenched, which can be really tricky to lock down a side of the board that you're unable to control, or to buff up your Anakin, since he has Overwhelm. 3 copies of Lightsaber as our last upgrade. So it's sort of a crazy deck. Just some facts about it that you'll notice right away. You've got 48 Vigilance cards and only 2 Aggression cards, so you're really not using much from the Aggression aspect. Part of this is because I only had blue cards with me, but part of this is on purpose to make sure Kuil hits as often as possible. We've crammed about all the healing that we can fit into a deck to offset all of Anakin's shenanigans, and you'll notice I do have a lot of upgrades. I think right now, at least what I've noticed in the last couple weeks, is that the meta has kind of forgotten that upgrade and removal is important. So if Anakin flips as a 4/7, you throw a lightsaber on him, or you throw an entrenched on him, he can become a huge problem for your opponents if they don't have an answer for that upgrade. But that's the list. So Banana, take it away with your questions or comments.
I like that it's basically a mono blue deck with an aggressive leader, so I think that's cool. Couple questions. Rivals Fall, why just 1? And why not fell the dragon there as a cheaper version, or why not Takedown? Would be my question about the Rivals Fall, or the Rivals Fall main deck.
Yeah, that's a great question. Rivals Fall is in there as a 1 because that got me down to 50. It was a 2 until the very last minute. In fact, for a while, Mundi was in the sideboard, and I had 3 Rivals Fall main board because I think it's really important to be able to remove big threats later in the game in case things do go beyond where Anakin is prepared to go. But I decided I liked the card draw from the new Legendary, and it was new card. New cards are new, so I wanted to play with them. As far as Takedown, I've been a Takedown fan since set 1, but I think right now what I'm experimenting with is I think Hello There is a reasonable replacement for Takedown. It's not quite as good, right? It's not going to take down a 5 health character. It doesn't just one-shot a Sabine or whatnot. But it brings Sabine down to 1 health, and hopefully you have a unit that can then attack her. It works really well when you want to be on the back burner, and it combos even better with Anakin, who has Overwhelm. So if I do play this after I flip Anakin, I can neuter something down to a 1/1 and then attack into it with, a 7/7 with Overwhelm and push a bunch of that extra damage onto the base. So I do think Takedown's a little bit better. Fell the Dragon is another really good choice, but I really wanted something that could be sure would take down leaders that didn't force me to throw Anakin into their leaders all the time, if that makes sense. But I think that they're great choices. You're going to see at the end, I think Takedown, I think it is Takedown and Fell the Dragon are these were the removal cards I had to remove at the last minute. So your mileage may vary on the removals I've chosen to include.
Another one that you might want to think about is Mystic Reflection. The 1 cost that if you control a Force unit, give something -2/-2. If you don't, it's just -2. But that's another way you could neuter something cheap, and you have enough Force units that I think you'd get the payoff.
Yeah, and it works with Anakin, so that's one that I would definitely check out, for sure. Wow. Mystic Reflection. I have to get hyperspace copies of that. And
then the other question I have, well, we can talk about it later, but there's another omission that I'm just curious about, is the Vigilance. A lot of those / blue decks will splash a 6 cost Vigilance. Just curious if that was in or out, or where that's at with this deck.
Well, let's get into it and talk about the features of the deck. We'll talk about Vigilance here as one of those chopping blocks. So I'm glad the ones you're picking are the ones that were painful for me to remove. If the card was if the deck was 80 cards, it would be in there. I think it still might have a place for some players. All right, so just going through a couple of key features of the deck. The main thing I want to point out on this image right here is Kuil is free card draw. There's a ton of passive card draw in your deck. People sleep on how much card draw you get just out of Yodas and Obi-Wans and Ki-Adi-Mundis, and Kuil is not a missing part of that equation. He's really good early on in the game if you can drop him early and keep him up, because almost every card he discards is going to be a Vigilance card. He's even fine later if you're able to play him and draw one card off of him. You're in this like evenly matched top decking mode of the game, but if you're getting 3 cards to their 2, that's a huge advantage to you. So I'm a big fan of Kuil, and that's how this deck originally formulated. Originally I was actually building, tweaking my Ray deck with the new cards, and then decided I really wanted to build one of the new leaders and said, okay, well I can take this almost 50 card Ray deck, right? You can see if I removed like 4 or 5 things and added some 1-drops, this would probably be a Ray deck in double blue, and just ported it over to Anakin. So 48 out of 50 card success rate for Kuil. The sideboard does have a lot of aggression cards, so as you're sideboarding things in, remember that, because you don't have a ton of early drops, so Kuil is going to be one of the ones you target early in the game. There's a ton of healing in this deck, and when I say a ton, I mean like a ridiculous amount of base healing. We've got top target to heal a ton off of our bases. We've got Restored Arc and Kuil that can come down turn 1, Yoda that can come down turn 2, and then Kanan or Razor Crest that can come down later, even bouncing a top target so you can replay it. A lot of times my opponents have to chew through like 40 damage, or I never actually have to pay the penalty of that 2 damage from Anakin because I'm healing so much between that, and we didn't even get to Luke and Redemption. But it's just a ridiculous amount of healing. So take advantage of that healing. Try to keep your base topped off. We're not using Anakin Skywalker's ship. We're not using the Resolute. We don't need to pile damage onto our base to get that reward from Anakin. We just want his guaranteed overwhelm body, and it works really well. There's Force Trait shenanigans here, so if you have a favorite Force Trait card, whether it be it binds all things or whatever, definitely consider running that. We have our 2 Force Throws in there just to give ourselves a little bit of a discard engine, but starting from round 2, we've got Yoda, Kanan, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Obi-Wan, Luke, so we could just go straight up the curve dropping Force units along the way, so we can always take advantage of a lightsaber, or ideally the Force is with me. The Force is with me onto Anakin is huge, pushing Anakin up 2-2 in his stats, making him like a 6-9 with a shield is just crazy. So definitely take advantage of Force-traded units in this deck. We've got Overwhelm tricks with Annie. A lot of people like that Overwhelm is built into Anakin's body, but in our sideboard, we have more Overwhelm units. So we have 2 copies of K2SO and 2 copies of Wrecker, because if we can get those units out and then give them the +2 attack from Anakin, they can just go crazy on your opponent's units. The main thing that I like to do is I really like to get Anakin flipped and then play some kind of upgrade on him, ideally a Jedi lightsaber, right? Because if you play lightsaber onto Anakin, he's going to jump up and now be a 7-10 Jedi unit that when he attacks something, he gives it -2/-2, and he has Overwhelm. So he's going to lower the thing's defense, basically turning Jedi lightsaber into a +4 attack upgrade, +5 attack upgrade, which is just bonkers insane for Anakin. So if your opponent doesn't have an answer to Anakin and doesn't have an answer to you throwing a lightsaber on him, it almost always ends the game with just that one unit. But you can also just put these like giant stat buffs onto the other units out there like K2 and Wrecker. You've got a ton of card draw. I mentioned this earlier, and we'll call it hand advantage, not just card draw. But between Kuil, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, you're getting a ton of card draw going up the curve. Ki-Adi-Mundi has been a little bit more situational. I've been a little unimpressed with where he gets me cards, but a lot of times he at least, forces my opponent to play suboptimally to not give me cards. And Razor Crest is actually really good card draw too. It lets you play a lot looser with your Jedi lightsabers and with your Entrenched. You might want to take lightsaber down to 2 to open up a deck slot. And Razor Crest allowing you to play that lightsaber on Yoda and let them put a lot of resources into removing this Yoda that's going to tear apart their board, and then bounce it right back to your hand so you can play it on Anakin later is just devastating. Most often, I use Razor Crest to just bounce a second top target, giving myself this constant topped up healing as Anakin overwhelms things. And we do have the discard package. It's partially sideboarded. We have 2 copies of Force Throw. We also have Pillage and K2SO in the sideboard. So if you need something to just nuke your opponent's hand so that when you flip Anakin, you're sure he's going to live, you've got some options for that as well. So those are some of the key features. I was going to go through the strategy tips and see what you think about these key combos. We've kind of talked about them all along the way, but this is the main key feature of the deck, right? Is getting Anakin out on his leader side, ignoring that bottom half. If you get +2 attack from him because you had 10 damage, then that's okay. With the amount of healing you have, hopefully that doesn't happen, and he's just a 4/7 with Overwhelm when he flips in. But the minute you throw that lightsaber on him, or even an Entrenched, you have a lot of versatility with Entrenched, whether you're throwing it on a space unit in the opponent's arena, or whether you're throwing it on Anakin to make him a monster with Overwhelm. You have a lot of options with these 2 upgrades. So get Anakin down, slap an upgrade on him, and see if you can bait out whatever upgrade removal they might have. Any questions on strategy tip number 1, Banana?
Nope, pretty self-explanatory. Good. I like that Anakin is a boss monster, so buffing him up and make him even more threatening, I'm excited for that.
It's pretty fun. General strategy tip number 2 is to swing up, right? The key advantage of Anakin's ability is that he's going to give your units plus attack when attacking other units. So this is going to hopefully let you trade up the curve. Now, you normally trade up the curve by also dealing damage to your base, putting yourself in this risky position. But we have characters with Restore almost all the way up our curve. So between Restored Arc and Yoda and Razor Crest, always be trying to sort of be on the back pedal. Let your opponent play their big on-curve unit and then attack up into it. So you can see here, Restored Arc can crash into several 3-drop characters with that +2 attack. And yes, you might lose your Restored Arc, but you traded your 2 resources for their 3 resources, and now you have your 3 resource thing to play with, and you restored a little bit so you didn't have to pay the price with Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments on swinging up with characters or value trading?
Anakin really shines at that. He does that better than most leaders, and that's another reason why cards like Hello There or Mystic Reflection would be solid and are good with him, because you can go even higher up the curve than you should be to really tank your opponent's value.
Yeah, I feel very foolish not having Mystic Reflection now that I reflect on it, because it even helps you with these units even before Anakin's out. You get to buff up your unit, swing up, and keep your unit alive. So with Mystic Reflection tanking something's stats, your Restored Arc now swings up into Millennium Falcon and lives, which is crazy, right? That's huge for you. So that's definitely a card people should consider and might get edited in before I go to locals next week. All right, strategy tip number 3, you've got to protect Anakin, right? Anakin is your boss monster, so you can't flip him when it's unsafe. If he's your only unit and your opponent is Vigilance Villainy and they have 3 resources up, don't flip him. He's going to get Power of the Dark Sided. Put something out there to protect him. You want to keep him as healed and as healthy as possible, so use some of your low to medium range units like Captain Typho to give other things Sentinel or Captain Typho himself, so that you can keep attacks off of Anakin. You can use the Kashyyyk Defender after Anakin gets attacked, because they're going to try to take him down, or maybe use takedown, but they'll have to do some damage to him first. And that Defender can absorb some of that damage, buff himself in the process, and make sure that Anakin stays as healthy as possible. I think my favorite move is using the Forces with me. A lot of times I don't flip Anakin at 6 resources. I flip him at 7, because I flip Anakin, and then I play a lightsaber on him, and then I Forces with me him. And then all of a sudden he's like a 9-12 character with a shield swinging in. There's other options you can do, like Hello There and lightsaber at 6. But Forces with me onto Anakin almost always gives him additional turns of life. The main thing you have to look out for then are things like Super Laser Blast and Rival's Fall, which do exist. There's nothing you can do to fully protect Anakin, but you need to protect him as much as possible, because if they do find a way to take him down before he gets a swing in, it can be a little painful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and don't forget about your removal, right? So the nice thing about being a mono blue deck is there's a ton of removal available to blue. We have unconditional removal in Rival's Fall. We have Hello there to make things weak and let our characters swing up, even if we're not using Anakin's ability. Luke and Chewbacca, once we've got Anakin flipped out, we can just start dropping these bodies with removal on top of them into the field. Chewbacca can even be smuggled in because we have our aggression hero. So don't only focus on your little low-cost units. If you bring those overwhelmed characters in, don't forget that late in the game, you have these bodies that can almost always naturally 2-for-1. And if you can 2-for-1 well keeping Anakin out, the game just ends. So don't forget about your removal. One other quick thing I wanted to mention, I didn't talk about the last card in the sideboard. We mentioned Pillage, K2SO, Rival's Fall, and Wrecker. The last card is Bravado. And I found this card to be really strong with Anakin, but not strong enough for main decking, because people can kind of maybe know about it. But if they don't see it in the first game and you bring it in, it can be a really big surprise in a best-of-3 match. So Bravado costs, I think, 3 if you've defeated a unit that turn and it readies a character. So you can use Bravado to ready Anakin and slam into 2 characters in the turn he flips, which is crazy good. So I've done a lot of Anakin play a lightsaber, attack into something, Bravado onto Anakin, attack into another thing, triggering lightsaber twice and Anakin's overwhelm twice. And it's just crazy how good that move is. So consider running Bravado in your decks because it is super fun with the boss monster deck. All right.
I like it.
Mulligans. So typically, you're just looking for a 2, 3, 4 drop. Like I said, this is a raid deck ported over to Anakin, but we basically gutted all the 1-drops and brought in a little bit more Restore. So a lot of times I'm looking for a Kuiil or a Restored Arc and a Yoda or Captain Typho. I really like Kuiil Typho because that lets me play Kuiil, next turn play Typho and give Typho Sentinel, allowing Kuiil to attack freely for at least 2 turns, giving you that hand advantage and draw. You'll notice 3 of these characters have Restore, so right away we're trying to get the Restore shenanigans going and keeping our deck as healthy, or base as healthy as possible. But typically, you're just looking for things on curve. So no fanciness with mulligans here. You're not like mulliganing for lightsaber. If you draw into it, it's great. If you don't, Anakin's still an amazing boss monster just at 4/7. He's only going to get better once you get those upgrades on top of him. I had a little sideboard guide for you of what I do for sideboarding. So versus aggro, a lot of times I will add a K2SO and a Pillage. I've got enough Restore. I'm kind of teched mostly against aggro, not with a lot of low to the ground units, but just with a ton of Restore that sets Sabine and those aggro decks back. And against aggro, I don't need things like Chewbacca that come in on turn 8, or I don't need the card draw from Ki-Adi-Mundi. What I need is I need to make sure that I run them out of gas to the point where they're just top decking and hope they're drawing the right cards. So Pillage does that for me, especially if I can get the initiative and then pillage their hand on a turn where they just have to work with what's on the board. Anakin is there to clean up their board and push damage to base. So adding a little bit of Overwhelm, a little bit of Pillage works out great. Versus mid-range, it's a little bit different. So against mid-range, I kind of want to get rid of some of my lower cost things. So I get rid of my Padawan Starfighter, I get rid of my Ki-Adi-Mundi again because I have a lot of draw already. We're going to kind of be fighting in that middle range of the deck. Anakin himself comes out as a mid-range leader. If you get that lightsaber on him, he becomes a boss monster to take care of their mid-range. So I like to bring Bravado so that Anakin can try to 2-for-1 trade in the middle of the game when mid-range is at its prime. And I like to bring Wrecker for the same reason. You can play Wrecker, kill something, and then trade Wrecker into something later, and all of a sudden you've 2-for-1'd them and set them back. Versus Control, it's kind of weird, but I bring in the same cards that I bring against aggro, mainly because against Control, if they get to that late game, they're going to have the advantage. You're going to have to be dropping, some of these lower cost units that you might be top decking and hoping to chip away enough damage at them if Anakin does get taken down. So we need to deplete their hand and get rid of all removal options that they have. So we're going to be using Pillage and K2SO instead of for the Overwhelm, mainly for the discard that he comes with. I get rid of Typho and I get rid of Entrenched because they're not going face real fast. I don't have to protect Anakin from characters attacking him in Control usually. I have to protect him from events just wiping him off the board. So I get rid of Typho and I get rid of Entrenched because they just aren't useful in that matchup. Any thoughts on sideboarding?
Nope, looks solid to me. It all makes sense.
One thing I did notice when I was writing this up and practicing the deck is that I sideboard in a lot of red cards. So your Kuil is going to become less effective if you sideboard in these red cards. So some cards that just didn't make the cut might be better choices for you if you wanted to sideboard. So when I originally made the deck, it was like 80 cards, right? And you got to cut it down to the best 60 and then pick which 10 go in the sideboard. So I originally had more heals in the deck. I had Repair, because you have a ton of card draw, like we mentioned. Kuil, Yoda, Obi, they're all almost always drawing. So if you can turn those draws just into more heals, why not bring Repairs? They're great, they're cheap, you can afford them. I used to have Vigilance. Vigilance at 6 still feels great. You can give Anakin a shield, which is crazy. You can do removal. The only thing you're probably not doing is the discarding 6, unless you get into a really weird match with Anakin. And I think that's the reason I cut it, is usually when I include Vigilance and I keep it at 6 is when I think I'm going to get into that mill game. But Anakin's got so much beef, and you're ending the game with Luke's and Chewbacca's. A lot of times you're not going into mill game range, you're going into I just have to defeat my opponent. The healing 5 is nice, the shield on Anakin is nice, but it was never 6 resources nice for me, so it made the cut at the very last minute. For more control or more removal, I originally had 2 copies of Takedown and 2 copies of Fell the Dragon. When I build a Vigilance deck right now, this is like the worst advice ever, so maybe don't follow this. But what I do, especially for Hero Vigilance, is I include 2 copies of Takedown, Fell the Dragon, Vanquish, Rivals Fall, and now Hello There. And then as I'm playing, I see which ones of these is more useful. Was there one in my hand that if it was a different one would have changed everything? Because then I should make that swap. Now what I found when I was playing this deck is I would constantly have Takedown in my hand and say, wow, if this was a 3-cost Hello There, it would have changed the world for me. And similar with Fell the Dragon, I found that I kept wanting to try to use it on leaders. A lot of the new leaders in the new set, not Asajj and some of them, but a lot of them have real big butts. Newt Gunray has 8 health, Padme has 7 health. There's a ton of big-butted leaders in this new set. So Takedown loses some value, like it can still take out a Sabine, which is beautiful. But we can also do that with a Hello There and just hitting Sabine in the face with Yoda, which is just as funny. So I think that I cut those for that reason. And then originally I wanted a little more hand advantage as well, right? I already had a ton of draw, and we've mentioned it, but by bringing more smuggle cards, it's not more card draw, but it is more hand advantage. So Covert Strength can be great, because when you get Anakin there and they try to take down your boss monster, if you can heal him for 2 and give him an experience, not only does it push more damage through on his Overwhelm, it also just continues to bolster Anakin and make him harder to remove. And I had Sugi in here at one point, mainly to smuggle. It was so I never had to make a decision about resourcing. She just always became a resource, and then she would come out later if I didn't have an Obi-Wan. It's like a free Obi-Wan that doesn't draw. The reason she made the cut is, like I mentioned, a lot of people aren't running as many upgrades. I don't think upgrade removal is as demanded as it used to be. I think it will be soon once people realize that they're sleeping on upgrades. But set 2, there was so much XP and so much shields that Sugi just felt like she always had Sentinel, like it was printed on her. But she no longer feels that way. Sometimes she's just a 4/6 body, which doesn't feel as good. That being said, it's still a card from your resource row you're playing instead of from hand, so it gives you a little bit of hand advantage, which can be important when you're trying to have the right Hello There or the right lightsaber at the right time. So these were cards that were made the chopping block at the very last minute. Could be swapped with sideboard cards if you wanted to. Any comments on the cutting room floor?
No, I got another card that I thought of as we were talking, as you were going through this.
Ooh, good.
As another one, Embo.
Ooh, yeah.
3-cost vigilance unit with 3/4, and when he completes an attack, if the defender was defeated, you can heal 2 damage from another unit.
Yeah, so he can't heal from himself, but he can heal from other people, which is awesome. I have used Embo in here. He was one of the earlier cuts because he didn't have. He was in like a really crowded spot. If we look at the deck and how many 3-drops we have the Dawn Interceptors, we have Yoda, we have Typho. So we have a lot of 3-cost things that are already crammed into our deck. And he was sadly one that I cut. I could see swapping the Interceptors for him, but I felt like I needed something in space that was strong enough in case my opponent wanted to play the space race game that I didn't have to like rely on surviving till redemption. So I threw in some Sentinels instead.
That makes sense. I just thought it was interesting enough that it was worth bringing up.
Definitely worth trying, and we'll say that Mystic Reflection was also on the cutting room board, but it wasn't even considered, but should have been. See, we learn by doing a two-person thing.
Yeah.
All right, so my concluding remarks, and then we just have open discussion about how awesome Anakin is risk-reward is super fun. I love playing Anakin the way he was intended, for you to sort of control the board and then be able to bring your boss monster out and win. I think you can do that just as well in Vigilance as you can in the other aspects, and it can be super fun to play in this counterintuitive way that might not make sense. It might seem like you're compensating a weakness, and I know there's a lot of different viewpoints in card games. Some people feel like if you're running an aggro deck but you have a little bit of control in it, that means you're not an optimized aggro deck because you're trying to do two things poorly, or you're trying to do one thing halfway and one thing part of the way. But with this Anakin combo, I've found that it really lends itself well to the way Anakin wants to play in this playstyle. So the other thing I would say about that in general is welcome to the Twilight of the Republic meta. All the heroes are wild, all the heroes are new, and we don't know what's good yet. So try the new heroes out in a color that seems opposite of their trend or their deck building instincts. Maybe even try old heroes out with colors they didn't work with before because of new cards, because you'll probably find something that's pretty cool and pretty fun. So that is my Anakin Blue. I'll throw the deck list up, and then we can chit-chat if you got any more questions.
Yeah. A Jedi, the Padawan Starfighter, you getting good mileage out of that thing? I am really torn on that overall as a unit.
Yeah, so I like it because it can still trade into an A-Wing with Anakin if I roll initiative and I need to take down a Sabine that's going in space for some reason. Mm-hmm. It's really good when you get a Force unit down with it, which since your leader has the Force unit, you can kind of put it in at the right spot. I did decrease it down to 2 at the last minute because it's underperformed compared to just like dropping a restored arc, right? Mm-hmm. But the extra 4 health from having a Force unit is super clutch. It makes people afraid to touch it. It's a little bit better in the Rey double blue version of this deck because you can play it with Rey turn 1, and then turn 2 you can buff it, and then turn 3 you can buff it and play a Yoda. So all of a sudden it's now like a 4 something, and then it becomes crazy. I thought there were enough Force units in here that I wanted to try it out, but it's definitely one that I could see cutting. I just wanted to make sure I had enough 2-drops that I would do something round 1, and I was worried that with Kuil, the Restored Arc, and the Kashyyyk Defender, it wouldn't be enough. As crazy it is, I originally had Moisture Farmers in here in that slot, and I would just use Anakin to attack with them for +2 because he turns them into a 2/4 and they immediately restore the damage.
Yeah.
So don't feel bad about doing that. It seems a little awkward, but it totally works. But I swapped it in because I wanted a little more space coverage. Some of that was scouting the local meta too.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. I've had a lot of fun with Anakin so far. I've done mostly yellow, though. Anakin yellow.
We'll have to talk about that in the future. Yellow Anakin looks interesting.
Yeah, but I played a couple games with this today, and it was fun. Getting Anakin to like a 12, whatever he is, and then just going over everything they could possibly play is a lot of fun. If you like boss monsters and you like making your leader your boss monster to end the game, this is for you.
I did have one game where I got Anakin out with a lightsaber or 2 on him, and then I think it was a lightsaber on him, and then my opponent kept dropping units, but they had like a ton of restore as well. They were playing double blue something villain, but they were still healing a ton. And I was like, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm going to make Anakin a real boss monster. And I threw an Entrenched on him, and they just stopped playing ground units. And I was never sadder, because he couldn't attack anything. All he could do was sit there. But it made it so they just like couldn't play in the ground for the rest of the game, which was pretty sweet. All right.
Yeah.
Well, this is the deck tech. Let us know in the comments below if you checked the deck out, if there's cards you would swap in, like Mystic Reflection, which is a genius move here, or if you have other cards that you'd want me to check out in this deck, because I'd definitely like to improve on it, because we're in like week 1.5, maybe half a week into the meta, so there's definitely room for improvement on some of these new creative, fun decks like this. So,
Sure.
hope you're enjoying TOR. For now, we'll see you in the arenas.